had a player that changed character each time we played. Normally, I have no issue with it, but this guy changed character each time he saw a new movie and based it on the main in that movie. Maybe not that much of an RPG horror story, but when this said player expected to have some godlike players from Mortal Kombat as his character or similar movies, it gets a bit too much. Hopefully not a waste of your time. Certainly not a waste of time. There is nothing wrong with basing your character off of something else. However, the line is a little thin once you get into I want to be overpowered territory. This is my first time posting here. This is something I've been holding on to for at least a couple of years, and I wanted to get off my chest. It all began when I got back in touch with a friend. After I took a break from D&D for about a year, she was going to run a homebrew campaign and wanted me to join. I jumped at the chance to play with her again because she was a great player and I had a lot of fun playing with her before our old DM got weird and the campaign fell through. And honestly, I met some really cool people in that game, and it would have been great if it wasn't for one thing: the DM's wife. It all started normal enough. She was a shy and new player, and we understood. She was learning her class and how everything worked, but I started to notice that there was a pattern. She would get aggressive with you if you didn't want to do things exactly her way. She would whine about not having any magical items, even though she had several magical items. She would straight up cry if you didn't include her in the plan, but combat was the worst. She wouldn't do anything. Our combat was pretty brutal, and we asked for the DM if she could talk to her, and our DM promised multiple times, but nothing changed. Your character would be rolling death saves, and DM's wife would be like, "I'm eating leaves right now." This happened more times than I can count, but best believe, if she is knocked down, she will be hounding you to bring her back up. After about a year, I couldn't deal with it anymore, but the saddest part is the stuff I mentioned wasn't even the worst of it. Maybe I'm being a jerk about it, but it got so bad I was happy to get called into work so I had a reason not to play. It clicked with me that she was an irritating player when we were about a month into the campaign in the Underdark. We were level 3, fighting in an arena against 3 armored ogres, and our bard kept getting knocked down. Everyone was doing their best in the fight, except for her. Instead of helping us, she decided to taunt the Mind Flayer overseeing the arena by climbing a nearby pillar and casting bonfire on the tapestry above him. She ended up getting one-shotted by a mind spike and fell to her death, which would have been fine if she learned from her mistake. But no, instead, she complained that the rest of the party didn't do enough to help her against the Mind Flayer. After that, the DM decided to have that very same Mind Flayer that killed her bring her back to life because her blood was special. Another instance of this player acting like a moron was when we were trapped in the Underdark, low on resources, and tried to save a party NPC that got kidnapped by a bunch of giant spiders. And I mean a bunch. Eventually, we caught up to them, and we were led straight into the Drider's Nest. Our bard really shined in this fight and was about to negotiate a trade. He was knocking out dice rolls and his RP was on point, but for some reason she could not stand the moment not being on her and decided to cast Friends on the Drider, and everything went to hell. We almost got TPK'd. Afterwards, we tried asking her why she would do that, and she insisted that she was somehow helping. This campaign was filled with moments like these, coupled with some eye-rolling roleplay, where she would somehow teleport to every scene to interject her thoughts even when the party would be split up at different locations in a town or city. She would also metagame and comment on events where her character was not present. After a year, it got to a point where I wasn't having fun and decided to leave. Unfortunately, due to the drama surrounding the DM's wife, the DM and I are no longer friends. I am still friends with most of the other players and wish them the best, but the game was not right for me. I have said this multiple times, I do not think there is anything wrong with playing D&D with your significant other. It's perfectly possible, and I think players that ban or DMs that ban couples at their games, well, I think that that's pretty silly. As long as people handle the game maturely, then I think it would be fine. That's clearly not what's happening here, though. Of course, naturally, new players are gonna make mistakes like this. I actually can kind of see the thought process of this player at some points. However, the important thing is communicating with the party and learning from mistakes that you make. Getting upset when actions that you take don't work out is kind of silly because this is a game where sometimes you're gonna lose. Dice have ones on them for a reason, and getting upset when things don't work out in your favor, it's pretty silly. Casting friends and it not working out, resulting in a battle, is not something that's an RPG horror story in itself. However, do not get upset at your other players because the mistake happened. At the end of the day, you made that decision, and you/your character should own up to it. It's okay to make mistakes, but it's better to learn from them. Context: this was a simple level 1 to 3 campaign I had set up to introduce some of my friends to Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition a few years ago, when Artificer was on its last Unearthed Arcana before the Eberron book came out, and we were just starting at level 1. Only relevant people are myself and my friend, who is only referred by pronouns below. We were playing over Discord in Theater of Mind because the group was long distance. Theater of Mind because this was most comfortable for the newbies since they were coming from pure roleplay forums with no battle maps or stats or anything. We couldn't use paper sheets really since they were new and need help knowing where to reference on their sheets. I had an established homebrew world with lore that I'd written and orbital mathematics I'd calculated out, including the deterioration of the moon's orbit until it eventually became a planetary ring. Overkill, I know, but I enjoyed working on this world and had been on it for a while before this campaign. My friend wanted to play a Mimic Artificer and sent me a homebrew conversion of the Pathfinder class because he didn't really like the Unearthed Arcana for Artificer at that time. Playing a Mimic was actually fine by me. Mimics are cool, and I really liked his character concept. I wrote a cool homebrew Mimic race for him to use, and he loved it, but the Artificer conversion homebrew was not only super broken, Artificers also just don't mesh well with the lore of the world because of the way magic and technology worked. I explained this, and he insisted on playing the character and trying to work something out that meshed with the lore. We settled on something that would work for both of us, and I explained that I was going to rebalance the class to not be super busted, as well as match the lore. And he said he was fine with it. I rebuilt the whole thing basically from the ground up for him, and made sure the new version matched with the lore well enough. And then the problem started. He was an experienced role player, but he mostly played on story forums. No stats or anything like that. You're just mutually telling a story with other characters. He didn't have a full character sheet for his character, despite insisting he knew how to make one, and myself sending him all the stats he needed, and prodding him to make one repeatedly. It took me literally making an entire sheet format on Google Docs from scratch, no idea why he wouldn't use any of the websites I recommended, Mythweavers, Roll20, everyone else used Roll20 and D&D Beyond, and walking him through filling out this custom sheet to get him to make a proper one, which he never referred to anyways. And then we got to his spell section. There was no Artificer spell list with the conversion, and he didn't want to touch anything from the Artificer Unearthed Arcana because it didn't quite match the flavor he wanted, in spite of me explaining that flavor we could easily adjust. So I told him he could pick a certain number of spells total, 10 I think, from the Wizard, Cleric, and Bard list as long as he focused on utility spells, a decision I stand by, to record his spellbook the same way wizards learn new spells. He picked 10 spells from each list and took spells regardless of their spell level. Again, we were starting at level 1. I did not notice this right away because I trusted him at the time and hadn't double checked his sheet because I was busy with getting the other new players ready. We played a session and he didn't use very many spells throughout it. I think he used a cantrip a couple times and maybe one first level spell. The session ended with the party taking a long rest and he went to go change his prepared spells for next session. He had a question about that and had me check his list. I counted and realized that the number I had told him to take for the total number of spells in his spellbook was the number he was using for his prepared spells, with 3 times as many for his known spells. That number was like 10, and you were supposed to choose like 2 to prepare per day. I wanted to make this version of Artificer into a utility caster with a large selection of spells to choose from for every long rest, but only able to take a highly limited number of them at a time. I quickly explained to him what had gone astray here and explained the balance I had set up for his still very overpowered character, so that he wouldn't completely eclipse the other character's skill sets. He got incredibly mad about that, kept insisting he did exactly as I told him to, and told me I was changing and ruining his character when I said that it didn't matter what I had originally said, since I couldn't convince him that he had misunderstood me, because I was making this ruling right now, even though I was just enforcing what we had already agreed upon previously. Ultimately, it came down to him not playing that character at all, because if they weren't at least as strong as a level 10 character, it was ruining his vision of them. Not that that's what he said, he just laid out how strong he felt like he needed to be, and that's where it lined up. Remember that I am starting this campaign at level 1. I was fine with swapping out characters because I want everyone to have fun, and if players aren't having fun, and if they're stuck with a character they don't want to play, it's easy enough to write one character out and new ones in anyway. So, he makes a new character. This one does have a character sheet, technically. It's on a website I've never heard of before, and haven't since, OrcPub, if anyone is wondering. And while the sheet format is good, it's almost entirely blank. I asked what's up with that and learned that this character is supposed to be a 5th level swashbuckler rogue, but you need premium access to have access to more than just SRD content, and he didn't have premium, so he just left the sheet mostly blank. He had access to all the books through some means, and I had provided perfectly good character sheet format on Google Docs and several other websites. So I have no idea why he decided to use some random service that he couldn't even type in the stuff manually on. Not to mention that the new character was level 5 for a level 1 campaign. The group let the campaign die a quiet death of, "We'll play next week," until people stopped asking if we were playing this week. It was for the best. The arguments got pretty heated during the whole thing between myself and this guy, and he showed me he didn't respect my rulings as DM nor my feelings as a friend, so I don't consider him my friend anymore, unfortunately. I also undid the lore changes I had made to accommodate his character, minor as they were, because I still preferred my original lore. I'm now playing in a different group with some very close friends, and it is the best D&D I have ever played, so at least there's that, and I'm not even the forever DM. First and foremost, that is the worst way a campaign can go out, in my opinion. That absolutely sucks, but like the OP said, probably for the best. I understand that for new D&D players, the game can feel overwhelming at times. However, responding to that overwhelming feeling by turning into a main character syndrome-fueled douche is probably a bad idea. The amount of work this DM put into making this player happy with the game, well, it really sucks, because at the end of the day, it was work wasted, and yeah, that's never fun. Look, asking your DM for some minor changes to lore is one thing, but it looked like this guy went out of his way to do everything specifically to make the DM's job difficult, and that isn't fun. Remember, your DM is a person playing this game too. If you go into it with the mindset of trying to make their life difficult, well, the game that you're playing is not going to be very enjoyable at all. So I will start with a bit of a background. When I was in college, a friend of mine asked if I wanted to play D&D with her. She had a friend who would be the DM for the first short campaign, and then we could switch it up. I agreed, and we asked a few more friends to play. We would be playing online, so we made a server on Discord and would play on Roll20. During the first session, the DM had to quit early and had to leave the group. We were all new players. I had only played 2 sessions of a failed campaign in a one-shot, so none of us had experience being a DM. I did, however, have a campaign set up, as I love writing, and this just came top of the mind. So if they were okay with me being the DM with no experience, I would be willing to do it. They agreed, and that's how I became the DM to the first campaign I ever played. We had a session 0 where I told everyone to make a character using only the player's handbook, as I still had to learn a lot and it would make it easier to keep up. We started the first session with 3 players and it all went well. Later, 1 player left the group I had gathered, and we got a few more players that were interested in my campaign and they asked if they could join. Now, I am the DM for a 6-player group, including 2 experienced DMs. The cast: myself as the DM, Dylan the half-orc paladin, an experienced DM, and the other players, who are less important to the story. Now the story. I started the campaign with a simple guard the convoy quest to the capital. It all went well and everyone was enjoying themselves. I then gave them a plot hook of children who were being kidnapped in a nearby village. They went to investigate and they found out that the kids were being taken into the forest. Here, they find a hag who was using the life force of the kids to keep the forest alive. The hag was a green hag with a bit of night hag in there to spice her up a bit for the experienced DMs. Dylan recognized an ability from the night hag and came to the conclusion that it was a fiend, and he started making holy water. They had not seen the hag yet, so he was basically metagaming, but as a paladin, I could see him preparing holy water just in case, and knowing it was a green hag and thus a fae, it wouldn't work anyway. They then found the hag and started to fight her. Dylan used his holy water, which had no effect, and started arguing with me that it should work on a fiend. I told him that it was a modified green hag, and that's why it did not work. He then became very angry that I had modified the monster when they were only allowed to use player handbook stuff for their characters. After about 10 minutes of arguing, yes, the game had to be paused for 10 minutes because he was angry his metagaming failed, we continued. They cast silence on her to prevent her from using spells. I tried to think of what she would do to get away and found out she had the ability to go in and out of the ethereal plane. So I explained how she disappeared. Dylan again stopped the game to start arguing with me. He said she couldn't cast spells because of the silence, and I had to explain that this was no spell but an ability, and he got even more angry. After another 10 minutes of arguing, we continued, and the hag managed to flee. During this, they found the brother of an important NPC they had met, but he was turned into a werewolf by the hag, and they found out that there was someone who could cure him in another town. Let's call it the Shire, because it was a halfling town. Because they were still bitter about this encounter and wanted to forget about it, they decided not to go there for the cure. This was fine by me, and I was preparing the next plot hook anyway. The next session, Dylan and a few other players were still bitter about the hag fleeing, but they did find the children, so they brought them back for a reward. Dylan then convinced the rest of the group to give him all their gold so he could buy a full plate armor set, and that it was good for the group as he was the tank. So they went back to the capital, and Dylan went to the blacksmith to buy his full plate armor. I checked the inventory and then told him that this blacksmith had no full plate. In my world, every city had most items available, but there were premium items that you had to find a specialist for. He got angry again that the capital did not have it, but then asked where he could find it. I looked it up and saw I had placed a specialist in the Shire. The halflings have good blacksmiths. So I told him it was in the Shire, not remembering that this was the same place as the plot hook. I placed the specialist before making the plot hooks. This made him even more angry as I was railroading them to go there. I wasn't. They reluctantly went there because this armor was very important to the group and went looking for the blacksmith. I then told them that he had left, the blacksmith had left, to fight goblins in a nearby cave as they had kidnapped their mage. This was part of a quest I had planned, which, again, was made after I placed the blacksmith, and I didn't want to retcon this. Again, I was accused of railroading, but because the armor was so important, they went to the cave anyway. They then arrived at the cave and they found out that there was a lot of goblins there and it was going to be difficult fighting them all. So they came up with a clever plan to smoke them out and kill them, one by one as they fled. So every round I advanced the smoke throughout the cave and had the goblins run out. Then they were all killed. Then the smoke reached the leader and his two large ape pets. So they run outside, getting damaged along the way because of the smoke and fire, but because they had a lot of HP, they were the bosses, they still managed to run outside and attack the players. Again, Dylan got really angry and I had to pause the game. He was accusing me of cheating as they should have died from the smoke and fire by now. I tried to explain that the cave was pretty big and the smoke had only one way of reaching them, that they had taken damage, but they still had a bit of HP left as they were stronger, and the plan had worked because now they only had to fight the boss instead of all the goblins. He was still not happy with this answer, and the session ended. Later through Discord, he spoke for everyone, which was not true, and they all agreed that I wasn't even trying to be a better DM or listen to their feedback, and they wanted to quit the campaign. I was disappointed, but sure, if that's what you guys want, I'll accept that. Later, I found out that the real reason they wanted to quit was because Dylan was going to start his own campaign, as he would do a better job, and I was not invited to the new group. So basically, I was kicked out of the group that would have never existed if I had decided to take a deep dive into DMing without playing much myself. A year later, I tried doing a campaign again with 4 players, 2 of which came from the original group, and after 2 years, we finished it. The players then made me cry as they wanted to make a poster out of the world map with memorable events from the campaign as they wanted a reminder of a great story. I also learned that the campaign Dylan had set up failed after a few sessions and that group had fell apart before my campaign even got started. So much for being a better DM. TLDR, metagaming player accuses me of cheating and railroading, then convinces the group to kick me out to play a better campaign. Later, I finished my campaign with a lot of praise after playing for 2 years, and his campaign failed, causing that group to fall apart. Alright, I'm gonna level with you guys for a second. The armor thing that precipitated the main body of the situation is pretty stupid. Like, I'm gonna be honest, if the players want the armor that bad, there are like 1,000 workarounds to the blacksmith not being in town. Just have his apprentice be selling the armor, have his significant other be selling the armor, etc. I don't think it would have been a big deal for this DM to just let them buy the armor with the gold that they rightfully earned. However, this DM is new to the game, as they said, so I excuse mistakes like this on the DM's part. However, an experienced DM like Dylan shouldn't be metagaming like he is. Guys, metagaming is something that you're gonna do accidentally at times. It's going to happen. It happens in my campaign every once in a while. However, getting upset at a brand new DM because your metagaming didn't work because they dared to adjust a monster a little bit, which I think every DM does, is also pretty stupid. Did this new DM make mistakes? Yes, absolutely. But these are mistakes that people are going to make when they're running their first campaign. Dylan is an experienced DM, at least apparently. He's been in the chair, so I don't know why you would act like this if you know what it's like and the pressure you're under when you're trying to run a game. I'm glad, however, that our OP managed to have a great campaign with his mates. Hey y'all, I'm not really sure if this belongs here, but I thought I'd see what you all thought. Sorry for the long post, it happened today and it really frustrates me, so I wanted to vent. So for context, today I was part of a homebrew one-shot adventure with a few people I know and a couple I don't. There were 6 of us players in total and a DM, so quite a big cast, but the only person to really be concerned about is our Barbarian. He was the problem player, at least in my opinion. Let's begin. We started our adventure arriving at a town as members of a mercenary guild to help the townsfolk retrieve an artifact stolen by some bandits. Straight away, our Barbarian shows hostility the entire time, basically just commenting about fighting and killing the whole quest. The quest giver had a pet wolf that was pretty much just chilling, not doing anything, and he instantly claims he's going to watch the wolf closely with his hand on his weapon, despite being told the wolf was basically just sleeping. Off we went on the adventure and we headed towards some ruins. When we arrived, the party started discussing what to do and how we should approach when suddenly the Barbarian just stormed ahead without any caution and entered the ruin. We followed along and entered an empty room with a door. We wanted to check for traps, but the Barbarian just walked up and swung the door open. True enough, the door was trapped, and he barely dodged a battering ram that swung down towards his head. You'd think he'd learn his lesson, but no. He decided to shout through the door at top volume that he was here to kill the bandits. So, out goes any chance at stealth. He then storms up to the next door, stepping on a tripwire attached to a bell, and without checking for any more traps or for any sounds on the other side, just kicks the door open and enters the room. In the next room, he finally pauses for a moment while we throw a torch inside to light the room up so some of our players can see. There are traps everywhere. Using a javelin, the Barbarian triggered a bear trap and broke the javelin in the process. Suddenly, from on some scaffolding, there was a voice of a small kobold who told us to stay back. The Barbarian then proceeded to maneuver past the traps to climb the scaffolding after the kobold, who at this point hadn't attacked and just wanted us to stay back. Alright, well the kobold jumped down to escape. Notice how the kobold is trying to run, not fight. Well, our Barbarian didn't care and kept chasing the kobold, so the little guy decided to use a sling and shoot a pebble at the Barbarian to keep him back. This angered the Barbarian, who tried to kill the kobold by grabbing him and throwing him headfirst into a trap. When that failed, the party were trying to convince him to stop so that we could just talk to the kobold. His response? The kobold attacked me and drew blood. By the law of something, I can't remember what he said, I have the right to kill him. We were all like, what? He literally acted in self-defense. We found out he was working with the bandits because they promised him shiny things. After some back and forth, we finally convinced the kobold to help us disarm all the traps and find the artifact. The entire party was trying to convince the Barbarian to let the kobold live because he was friendly and was just misguided by the bandits. He clearly didn't really know who he was working for. The Barbarian just couldn't let this go, though. He insisted he had some right to kill this kobold. Eventually, we managed to calm the Barbarian. The Barbarian then tried to tie some rope around the kobold's neck to, quote, keep him on a short leash. He failed, and we kept him away from the kobold for a while. We then approached another door, and once again, he didn't check for anything and tried to kick it open. Turns out the door was an intelligent mimic that was able to talk to us. Didn't really appreciate getting kicked in the face. We convinced the mimic not to eat us by promising to feed it the bandits' bodies if it would let us pass. So off we went to the next door and went to go down the corridor when Barbarian decided to grab the kobold and drag him ahead in front of us, kick down the next room, and throw the kobold across the room into a crowd of bandits. Obviously, combat started. Once again, no attempt at subtlety was made, and we couldn't use any stealth. We managed to make a good fight against the bandits, and the kobold ran off down a different corridor. When we killed the bandits, the Barbarian chased after the kobold. Again, I had enough at this point. I chased him down, and just as he was about to throw a javelin at the little guy, I pinned the barbarian to the wall and told him to stop trying to kill the person who was trying to help us. Then, the leader of the bandits attacked us. When it came to the barbarian's turn in combat, he says, "If I had enough movement, I'd be disengaging so that I could run past the bandits and kill the kobold." The whole party was just done with this vendetta at this point. Then eventually, during the fight against the bandit leader, the barbarian was knocked down and on his death saving throws. Fortunately, our fighter used a healing potion to revive him. Fortunately? Really? After the fight, the barbarian went after the kobold again. The whole party was just like, dude, he attacked you in self-defense with a pebble. You threw him through a table. You guys are even. It legitimately took us about 10 minutes to convince him to stop trying to kill the kobold. It's probably not even as bad as I thought it was, but it was just really annoying that he was rushing in and not waiting for the party or listening to us. It seriously felt like he didn't want to play with the team. I am not even going to pretend to understand what this barbarian's problem with kobolds is, but this is absolutely ridiculous. Look, there's nothing wrong with a little bit of good inter-party conflict. It can really spice up a campaign, but it can't be conflict between the actual players at the table, because that is going to breed a little bit of bad blood, and that's clearly what's happening here. This barbarian is starting to annoy people with his character's stubbornness, and that is not good. Look, playing a character with problems is fine. Characters should have flaws, but they shouldn't be, how do I put it, this unbelievably annoying, to say the least. And that is all I have for you guys today. If you guys enjoyed this episode of RPG Horror Stories and want to let me know, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then please do check out my Tabletop Tavern Tips series, where I give more D&D advice for both DMs and players. And while you're there, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment Meta Man-child to let me know you made it to the end of the video. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.